Hi, Ali. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, our conversation today is going to be about a topic we're both big believers in, and that is how to save time, budget, and stress a user research approach to digital projects. And just to give a bit of a sort of an overview for the audience, we're going to talk about or cover 4 topics. The first one being why digital projects go off track and how to stop it early. The steps you need to take before wireframing, why leadership must sponsor the process, and finally, round it off with practical tips on what good looks like and how to get started. But before we jump in, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so I'm Ali Carmichael. I'm the founder, owner, and managing director of an agency called Experience UX. And we specialize in user research, usability testing, and we have a user-centered design framework.
Okay, I'm Alex Blondin. I'm a customer clarity consultant, and I help organizations gather high quality insights about their customers to help them make the right strategic decisions for their business and, well, their business and, of course, their customers. Okay, so let's jump right in then. I thought I might ask you first, when you look back at projects that have struggled in your line of work, what do you tend to see at the very beginning?
We're often brought in, I suppose, when projects might be struggling. And I think often we find that quite complex digital projects seem to fast track that kind of point of kind of planning and briefing and quite quickly get into deciding on the technology and quite quickly try to jump into Figma and start putting together some ideas of designs. And often I think they begin with the intention of doing it properly and doing some testing. But once the ball starts rolling and things start happening and we start seeing wireframes and things up on Figma, the ball's rolling and it kind of moves forward. And I often find that client teams have moved to a point where they struggle to kind of step back and then maybe sort of take a step back from the project and go, right, let's just have a look at this from a user perspective. So I think they always start with the intention of incorporating customers and users, and they're always a big part of that initial conversation. But often the project gets runs away quite quickly. And I guess we're often brought in a bit later on. So when something's been pulled together and suddenly we need to test it with users, that's where we get brought along rather than before we start designing, which is an ideal point for us to come in, because then we'll start saying, okay, well, let's look at it from a user perspective. Let's go and get the user narrative on this to help balance the brief to make sure it's moving forward in the right direction.
Yeah, everyone in the industry knows it. Most digital projects suffer from delays, stress, and budget overruns. It seems to be like a given. And I think what you said there about how you often, your part of the project comes in a bit later and suddenly you're having to try and say, okay, well, actually, we need to backtrack or we need to look back to the start of the project to incorporate the user more. That's where I think that a lot of organizations miss a trick, or at least maybe even call it a shortcut. If they'd looked at it in that way and going, right, who is this for? What do we need to give them? And then work our way back. That makes life much easier, because otherwise what we're doing is we're often introducing a lot of assumptions about who the users are, and that causes a project failure. But the point of what we're talking about today is we know that these things happen and that projects fail. What we want to talk about is how to avoid that failure, right?
I think one of the other errors, kind of honest errors, is that there'll often be what we call marketing profiles put together. So when they're talking about customers and users, they're looking at their marketing profiles and then trying to design for those profiles. But of course, marketing customer profiles are designed for outbound, for reach, for finding the audience to get our message out to. And they're very rarely helped to design, but we kind of have this miscommunication between kind of the marketing personas that are existing and shaping a digital product around those. And of course, what we really need to do is take that audience and reshape them based on their need to be using that particular interface or that particular product. And by doing that, we can then design around it. So again, I think one of the challenges is trying to kind of, it's like square peg round hole scenario, where the personas are there, they're right, they're correct, but they're about outbound, not inbound. And that causes quite a bit of issues when it comes to design those solutions.
And is there Are you also alluding to the fact that there are also often silos between teams? And I'm not even talking about big teams, but often you've got different departments or different people who are in charge of different parts of a system, a product, or a service, and they'll have some very, very clear understanding about who the audiences are, who the users are. But then you find that in the other department, they also have a very clear understanding of who those users are, but actually, for some reason, they're not quite the same. And that causes also quite a high level of friction.
Yes, I think everyone has really good intentions. I think people are trying to do the best work, and everyone wants it to be a good product. Everyone wants it to work for the users. But you're right. Without the perspective, when we talk about the user or the customer within a team, we can have different perspectives. And even us, playing a kind of UX role, if we just talk about the user, we're not really shaping the conversation around reality. And we can all have our own versions of what that customer might be. Even if we're looking at a persona, if we're not looking at it properly, we can all walk away with slightly different perspectives. As
Yeah.
human, we see the world through our own thinking. So in a way, it's not about people are just going off doing their own thing. I think everyone has the right intention, but in a way, that's part of the problem because everyone thinks they're doing the right thing, but when it comes together, there's things don't quite sit properly. They haven't been thought through fully. The journeys have been prioritized in the wrong way. New features and functionality are being added without proper consideration. And of course, the market, the digital space is moving so fast. By the time you've got a brief and you're starting to look to deliver the project, the world has changed and people are expecting different things. And that all creates noise for the project team, which in addition to everyone trying to design for the user and trying to get it right, just creates a bit of an issue. And I think that's where things go a bit long. They take a bit longer to create and to do. Content slips. The technology and the designs aren't quite fitting quite together properly. So this ends up with a situation where the teams are trying to meet a deadline, but things aren't fully aligned, and that causes further issues that need more time, often need more budget, and really probably need stepping back to look at it afresh again.
I think that's the whole point of what we're talking about today is that, I mean, I don't know if you see it in the same way, but I see the user research as being a secret sauce. I think that everyone does user research. We are all creating personas. We're looking at user journeys. We're testing. We're doing surveys. There's a lot of things are happening, but what we're trying to advocate here in terms of de-risking a project, especially a complex digital project, or even I think any digital project is actually complex. As easy as they may seem, a simple website, etc., they all have their own degrees of complexity. But highly structured and in-depth customer research is actually far cheaper and far less painful to do upfront than making all those assumptions, jumping in, getting to a point where you're starting to build something, and then you see that things are falling apart at the seams because there are gaps in understanding and knowledge or misalignment between the different teams. And these can be both internal and external, where we've all made assumptions. As you say, we all absolutely come with the best of intentions. I completely agree with you. But I think it's completely normal that if we don't have one very strong thread or through line, which in my view is the customer, or the end user in this case rather than customer, it's all too easy for things to go wrong, I suppose, to keep it simple.
Yeah, and back to knowing who the user is, and what is the common thread that we're all working for here. And whilst the business plays a big role, it needs to be a business success. The business is paying for it. The business is briefing it. The common thread can't be the business because it will end up not being so usable, not being so successful. So the common thread needs to be who we know as the user and what their needs and requirements are, how we prioritize around those to help us not get caught up in the noise. So it's a place of refuge, I suppose, in the project to go, well, let's just sit back and look at the user again based on what we're doing here. It helps us prioritize, it helps us make decisions, it helps bring a team back together to remind us of what we're building for here. But you need those in place at the beginning to help drive that. And I think one of the unsaid challenges, I think, a lot of the time is again, everyone has the best intentions, but the thoughts of doing some research, thinking about that kind of best practice UX, user-centered design approach, you feel like it's going to slow the project down. Everyone's in high speed mode, there's deadlines, and everyone wants to get cracking. And again, I think often when we go in, we have to play that, well, let's just take a pause for a second and let's have a look at this from a different perspective. Let's build that user narrative up. And whilst it does require a bit of time up front, it is a slightly more front end heavy part of the process. When you look at the project as a whole and post launch, it actually saves time, it saves money, it saves decision making, it saves sleepless nights, because you have the grounding at the beginning that you can return to throughout to make the right decisions.
I'll also add to that I think it's really important to look at understanding who we're building a thing for is not something that is just for the digital team or just for the marketing team. And again, I think it comes back to what I said about those silos that often happen. And again, I'm not saying everyone looks at it in this way, but I've often seen on projects I've worked on that there's an assumption that this is something that we'll do. Like, for example, well, the first time we'll talk about testing or stress testing even our personas is the time when we have those first wireframes and that we're putting them up somewhere for people to start clicking around and testing. Sorry to be a very, very reductive in that, but that's the first time I often see that people say, right, this is where we're really doing user research. And actually, I feel that it should be owned throughout the whole organization. Like, everyone should be, from the CEO or from the leadership team all the way down to the customer facing team. Everyone should be in some way thinking, what are we doing and who is it for? And what do I know, or what can I find out about those users that it will be hopefully or potentially absolutely critical to the way that we look at how we develop this project, which means that naturally that creates, when you start a project, even before you start considering the technical aspect, it creates some a prototype even in your mind or in your strategy, which I think is far, far more ahead than if you just say, okay, we've got an idea, we think this is good, right, let's start drawing something nice and seeing if this works by doing a bit of testing through some usability testing program.
I think it's about preparation, and again, testing is required throughout. And one of the challenges I think is there are different types of testing that I wonder if people confuse. Certainly between things like user research and usability testing, maybe use case testing can be confused. They're different things. They have different roles to play. But I think a lot of teams, it's useful for them to just assume the testing's been done because we've done use case testing or we've done stress testing. So knowing and understanding the different roles that are played throughout the project as it's coming together. But back to that beginning piece and that investment in time, it's kind of like decorating and painting a wall. And I've definitely come a cropper where I've decided I can't quite be bothered to put the time into prepping the wall properly, and I really just want to get this wall painted. And it ends up being a bit of a botched job and not too good. And the kids are complaining their wall hasn't been painted properly, and that's really because I haven't taken the time. Because in my head it's like, right, I'm painting the wall this weekend. I just want to get the wall painted. I've got the paint. There's the wall. Let's get it done. But actually, to paint a wall properly, most of the work goes into the preparation. You've got to get the wall right. You need to make sure you've got the right foundations to put the paint on, make sure the wall is flat and any holes are filled and the skirt boards and are all taken care of. And if I skip that, mistakes happen and it's not as good a job. It still gets painted. It's still done. And I might hit my deadline by the end of the weekend, but it isn't as fit for purpose as it could have been. Whereas actually, if I'd have said, right, we're going to take the first weekend to prep, make sure I've got everything I need, make sure it's ready, and then the second weekend to maybe paint it, whilst that might have taken a little bit longer, and whilst I haven't been able to get into the painting, the fun bit, the painting quickly, actually the painting is much more interesting and rewarding because I've taken the time to prepare at the beginning. And that's what I think the kind of the user research, the UX, the user-centered design approach piece is a bit like preparing the wall. It's that bit at the beginning which isn't essential. You can get ahead and paint the wall without it, but if you really want it to deliver and have longevity, then that preparation is really important.
So I think I'd like to jump in there with actually a practical aspect to this one, literally about the painting, because we're renovating at the moment, and where we live, we found that previous occupants, one of them, literally I'm going through sort of like archaeology through the wall here, they put exterior render inside the house. So on the walls in the flat, they put in exterior render, and then someone else came and plastered over it or painted over it, I don't know. So I can tell you that the prep now, because of the shoddy work that was done before, to have to go through and try and scrape this off, which is proving to be practically impossible, means that sort of follow-up prep work, if it had been done properly before, it would have been easy. Now I'm doing so much more work because of it. And I think there's a really nice analogy there, is that not only if you do the prep work properly, that's great, but actually if you do it really badly, then it might look good for a year or two. And now I'm going back to the digital side. But my goodness, when it's time to upgrade or update or even evolve because new insights or new information has come in about the purpose of your product, and you've got to work with something that has been done badly because of the lack of preparation, my goodness, that is painful as well. So yeah, I completely understand that analogy, and I really like it.
Yeah, and let's be honest, often we just don't really want to uncover stuff. We don't really want to do the prep because you're right. We might find when we dig into it, we've got tiles underneath, or as you found, there's external rendering on the internal wall. You don't know what you're going to find. Suddenly we moved into a new house, and sometimes you're thinking, oh God, you're kind of aware of the pain I'm going to get into. So I might just skip past it. And of course, it ends up being a much bigger job later on down the line because we didn't take the care to do that preparation in the first place.
Yeah. But also, don't you think that it's also quite hard to get to do the research, and from a perspective of, do you really want to find out what they think? Like, firstly, I think, there's one view is that, you're running your business, you've got a pretty good handle on what's going on and what's needed. It's not the nicest thing to necessarily hear back potentially get a whole load of feedback, which is, now this is absolutely not what I want, when you've put your heart and soul into it. And I think that's also a difficult part of this, is that no one really wants to get bad news, when in fact the bad news is, or rather no news is not good news. Rather, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not an easy thing to do either. I have a lot of respect for those leaders who are going out there saying, no, we have to sort of, face the truth, face the music, and actually accept that we might not be doing the right thing for our customers, rather than going, no, it seems fine, all is good, we're doing well, so let's crack on.
But I think the context is interesting, because if you do this early on, you're not getting customers and users coming back saying no, or I don't like it. You're not at that point yet. You're looking to understand, you're looking to build a perspective. And we're not even asking people what they think or want so much. We need to see them in the context, because people don't know what they want. If you get out and ask people what they want, you don't really know. It's like when people launch anything new, there's a segment of your audience who are never going to like it because people just don't like change. So it's got to be really usable and user friendly. So when they do start using it, they quite quickly recover. So we ask people what they want, and the context is important, and people don't really know what they want. So we need to explore deeper with our audience. So if we have a new idea, or we've got a new concept, a new website, what we want to be doing at the beginning is just understanding the current perspective, the current experiences, and we can ask people, what are the challenges they face at the moment, where do they source their information, et cetera, and that's all useful. But we need to kind of see it unfold and just see, where are those kind of issues and hiccups? Where are the gaps in the market? And therefore we can better sit with our clients and say, well, this concept really fits, but the key parts of the concept that aren't being met at the moment is this, and this, and they're the bits we need to build on and utilize that. And that might be slightly different to what they're thinking internally. So it's quite strategic and tactical at the same time in helping get that brief right. Whereas, of course, if you've just launched it and gone live and realized the stats aren't working properly, and then you put it in front of people and it doesn't work very well, then you're going to get the hard-hitting no, and I don't want to use this, and it's not very good. And that obviously hurts a lot more. So I think the advice is to kind of bring it forward and just have it as a part of the natural process of building the brief and getting the brief right, rather than getting the reactive comments and opinions at the end of the process.
But I do want to point out, though, that I think it's more common than people may admit to want to actually just jump ahead and build something and see if it works. Because actually, when you look at the unicorns out there, and we should never be looking at the unicorns because they are unicorns, but that's how they tend to work. They've launched something that has become wildly successful, so everyone loves that, and they have the means and the manpower, the firepower to actually go and literally build something and then see if it works, and that works for them. But most organizations don't necessarily have that amount of, or that luxury of being able to do that. So again, it comes back to what you said earlier, which is all of that early preparation, which sometimes may fall under, well, we don't have the time or the budget to do that. Actually, all you're doing is that you're just moving the problems further down the line, which comes back to the point of, well, all projects usually are stressful, go over budget, and are delayed because of that lack of preparation. So you're absolutely right. It's that strategic thinking early, very, very early on, which is going to massively smooth out a lot of those issues. I can't promise that they would all be smoothed out because there's always unknowns, of course, but it really gives you far more chance to get it right the first time rather than build something, see that it's catastrophically wrong. Then you go, either I've got two options. Either I've got to go and admit that it's completely wrong and ask if we can have some more budget to build it again, or just try and see if it works and sort of slowly realize that actually this is all wrong, and eventually anyway have to start all over again with a lot of anxiety from everyone going, well, we tried it, it didn't work, when actually that's not the truth. It's just that we didn't build or create the right thing for the right people. And all of that could have been answered much early on.
Yeah, and as you alluded to there, we've got to look at where the influence is. Social media is so noisy, and there are so many bubbles we find ourselves, and so we can already see people doing this, and that's the right thing to do, or that approach, and that's the right thing to do, and we all find ourselves having to kind of maybe try and work out, oh, how do I run my project like that, or we should be doing this because everyone else is doing it, and it's such the wrong way to look at it. Things like the MVP became really popular, and yeah, the MVP works really well in certain environments, in certain projects, but people started doing it in all projects. It's just crazy trying to get to that point without doing the proper thinking. So it's really looking at what's right for this project. And as you said, actually some people get it right. Some people don't need it because intuitively they get it and they understand it. But that is rare. That is really rare. Steve Jobs, we can argue, had that and he could lead that. He didn't need UX to know what he needed to do. He had an intuitive understanding. But most businesses don't have that. Most teams don't have that. And even most, leaders in those teams, they might have the idea, but how it's actually going to shape itself isn't part of that intuition. So for 98% of the businesses, there needs to be a bit of process. There needs to be a bit more understanding. There needs to be more input, a different narrative to help shape how we're going to roll this project out, to make sure when we get to that endpoint, you've got really good delivery, a really good digital product that's going to work for the business, for the customer, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well.
I think what I'd like to talk about now is that from my perspective, I don't necessarily just look at digital projects, although that is a strong part of my background, but I tend to look at understanding the users, or in my case, the customers, as something that permeates the entire organization. And so I think that what's really important is to look, also you need to look at that project in its wider context. And of course, you've got a website, it's the sort of the window into your business, so you can clearly see the strategic link into it. But you need to have a bigger view as to what is the entire ecosystem of the organization and how they are interacting with your business, be it through digital means, through people, through anything else, through social media, so something you mentioned earlier, etc. And then understand that entire ecosystem to understand what their user needs are and how that impacts the project. Which is why one of the pieces of advice that I would always give is that doing qualitative research as a starting point, however small it is, even if it's with only, let's say, 5 trusted customers, to sort of get into the vibe of the thing, of actually getting maybe some hard truths coming through, is better than trying ignoring it and then just jumping ahead and just doing surveys and all like going into the quant side. Having real meaningful conversations really opens your eyes and your understanding to what the real needs, the wants, and the pain points of your audiences. And then you can look at that and go, okay, this is how that translates then to my users, because obviously not necessarily all your customers are necessarily users of every single piece of software or product that you've got. So you need to understand those subtleties and those differences. But that sort of having those real conversations, really talking to people. And I'm not saying that the rest isn't important, but I think it's a really, firstly, quite a safe place to start having those conversations, but it's also a strong way to understand or get an early understanding of what people like or what they dislike. And then you can use that to then start doing further research through surveys or user testing, etc. And I think that's quite important as well, to have a methodology. And what I wanted to ask you is there anything in terms of how you approach your projects, and if you have a methodology that you tend to recommend or advise with your clients?
So yes, our user-centered framework follows 3 core phases of work: research, architecture, design. And in an ideal perspective, you want to do that before you brief in the digital agency, before you brief in the technical. So what we like to do is to start with that research, understanding the users, and then there's an architecture process. So we're not worrying about creative design at this point. We're certainly not worrying about development. We're looking at shaping and flow, and there's a kind of logical process to go through to ensure we're getting all the user needs and requirements and the business needs and requirements. And the architecture is about utilizing all of that and flowing it through with journey mapping and wireframing, and taking it to prototype, and then bringing design in to design around that architecture. And again, building the prototype, start adding content to it, and then testing that prototype until we're absolutely confident it works from a user perspective and we've met all the business objectives. When you have a really good high fidelity prototype that's followed that process, that's the best brief you can give to a digital agency for development. All the thinking has been done. The front end is together. Now we just need to make it work. So if you are going out to offer it to briefs and to look at different agencies, they're all working from the same hymn sheet. There's not anything open, to ponder. We know what it needs to look like. We just need to make it work. And we don't really care at that point what the technology is going to be. So when we work with that with a client, it works really well. They then can choose an agency based on them all replying and briefing their projects based on that prototype. And then when they start working, it's all done much quicker because all that thinking is done. We know what the front end needs to look like. All the assets are there. The client could be working on content all this time as well. And the project ends up being delivered much quicker and more cost effectively.
I think that's exactly why I talk about customer clarity. That is the thing that allows people to speak the same language on any given project. Because as you say, you've got the brief right at the beginning with, exactly who it's for, why you're doing it, and what are the needs of those users. And there can be a lot less, again, I don't want to say no, but I would love to, there is a lot less risk that you as the agency goes, well, I'm sorry, I thought that's what you wanted, like, or best practice has told me this. I mean, it's not wrong, but it might not be the right thing to that specific client in that moment. Whereas there, they brought to you all the information that you need. You probably feel a lot more relaxed going, wow, I actually know who I'm building this for, why I'm building it, the impact it has on the users, on the internal teams, on whoever the sponsors of the project. Everyone, all that information has been given to me up front. And now all I have to do is look up at my shelf and go, right, well, I need a bit of this, a bit of that. And I don't know if quite the analogy is right there, or maybe it's a cooking analogy, but I've got all the ingredients and I know what I'm cooking now, and I can deliver something really nice rather than an absolute fiasco, which, again, your job is to always deliver, the best thing. But I'm assuming that also you must suffer a bit of that stress because you've got to navigate all those unknowns. And if you had all those great insights right from the beginning, you could probably deliver faster and cheaper and better as well, because you have everything at your fingertips.
Yeah, and really our job is to do that process. So it's rare for us to have to get involved, and we often won't do we won't do wireframing if we haven't done the research. We certainly aren't going to do
Nice.
design if we haven't done the wireframing. So when we won't go in and do that, that's the kind of, we're not in a position to just go in and design a website. So we don't position ourselves as a design agency. So, we have our user-centered framework. A lot of our work is the research and the testing, but we have our user-centered design framework to help our clients shape and mold their websites and design them, have them in front of users, get them tested, have something the client team can play with quite quickly. And it all happens pretty quick. You end up, all that thinking is done from the research through to design pretty quickly in comparison to when you're trying to develop it at the same time as well. So it can be delivered internally quite quick. Confidence is built quite quickly. As you say, you have all the ingredients you need now, and then the technical agency, the digital agency can come in and make the magic happen and make it happen and bring it to life.
And I'd also add that there, you're talking about those internal users as well. That's user experience, understanding and delivering something to your internal audiences that they understand, they can get to grips with, and give you as much feedback as quickly as possible. That is also the user experience of a project. It's never just about the end user, is it? There's always something more to it.
Yeah, it's a story of how you get from one point to another, and I think it's really important when we deliver our work that we're able to tell that story. Whilst there are multiple deliverables along the way, when we get to that kind of final prototype, it's really important for my team to talk through that story. Here's where we started. Here's here's the why behind the what. Here's why we've created it this way. Here's what's happening. It's all based on the research. It's based on the user personas. It's based on the journey mapping. And these are all points where users and stakeholders have all been involved along the way. So it's no surprise either when we get to that point, because we've involved the client teams, we've involved the users. It's been tested. We know it works. So it's a really good place to be. And then when you're talking to agencies about building it, you can have all that conversation with them. Everything is there for them to go and build from.
So to use the why question here, from your perspective, why should leadership be part of this, or be an integral part of it, and in fact call it sponsor the research process? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, leadership is critical in here. Partly, everyone fundamentally has a job to do. And whilst we all have our ideal ways of doing our jobs and how things should be done and how we perceive things should be done, at the end of the day, we've got a job to do. And most of us are delivering for the leaders in our business. So I think there's a really important to be aligned and to involve. So again, there's no kind of surprises. But I think from a leadership perspective, what we're looking for is kind of trust in the process and probably a little bravery, because I think because we're using this qualitative, you touched on earlier about, the qualitative and the quantitative. People can rely on the quantitative. It's data orientated. If things don't quite go to plan, you can point to the data. The data gives you the reporting mechanisms. It gives you the before and afters. Whilst we know we can argue with data, in an environment where we're reporting and, we can say the data's there, I was basing my decisions based on the data. Well, as qualitative requires a bit more feeling, a bit of intuition, a bit of understanding, and having to make a call. And whilst our role is to help our clients make that call, it is for them to make the call. So the leadership has to have that. I want to use the word bravery. I don't really mean that. I think when you're in it, you're not having to be brave to make that decision because everything's in front of you. It's quite obvious what needs to happen. But I think so much is relied on about, well, what if things go wrong? Can I rely on the decision I'm making based on this information? If it's not hard data, can I trust it? So I think there's a relationship between the data, which is telling us what, and that is important. We want to know what is happening. What does the before look like? What does the data tell us? What does the market look like? It's all interesting stuff, but it doesn't tell us why. So what we want to build a picture up is the why, and understanding the why behind anything is what helps make that decision. So that's the point where we want stakeholders to understand that why, to help make those decisions, to help drive things forward. So a lot of our process will include kind of stakeholder workshops to kind of bring them on side, to help them see the process as it unfolds, and to get those kind of penny drop moments as things start clicking together. But also, people are in leadership positions for a reason. they've got experience, they've got drive, they've delivered performance previously. Their necks are on the line. So it's really important that their experience comes in as well, and their perspective, their ideas is really important to include. So again, it's not about let's ignore that and move forward anyway. It's not let's just focus on users. We have to understand the business, we have to understand the stakeholders and the project teams we're working with. All of that input is important. But as we touched on earlier, the thread that we all return to is the user. But we need everyone on board. And so it's really important to involve regular reporting, showing the success, getting a prototype, leaving it with stakeholders, leaving it with leadership to play with it, to get their thoughts and ideas. And we genuinely want their ideas and their thoughts at that point. And sometimes there might be a slight difference in opinion. And that's where we can say, well, from the user research, we've seen this. From the data, we've seen that. And really, it's over them to then make that decision. And it's not our decision to make. It's the leadership's decision often to make those calls. Our job is to present the information in a way that they can make an easy decision and be comfortable they've made the right decision.
One thing I will say, part of my work is that I put together insight hubs where, having collected either myself or through the internal teams, actual interviews with users and customers, and then analyzing that and putting together these show reels of actual customers or users talking about how they use the product, what they like, what they don't like, what their pain points are. It's the only times when I've actually seen people in those senior leadership roles who have to make those pretty critical decisions, to actually watch those and then have a bit of a sigh of relief and go, oh, right, well, now I understand that bit, so I know what to do now. Whereas the figures, whilst also very important and absolutely have their place, don't necessarily give you that sort of reassurance. But actually, my point is that the emotional side, where you can look at real people talking about something, not only does it actually give you a lot more clarity as to what people are looking for, but then it actually, I think, gives you a lot more clarity about the numbers that you're looking at as well. And so that means that everything that you've got in front of you has a lot more meaning, and therefore has a lot more impact on those decisions that you have to take for whatever the project is. And again, it's not necessarily about just the website. It could be so many other things, because they're all intertwined. And that's really the value also of understanding your customers, is that I think, firstly, from a leadership perspective, I think it's really reassuring that you're giving people extra insight that they can use to make their own decisions as well. I think it really just makes people feel a bit more at ease, that you trust them, you're giving them the resources they need to make those decisions. But also, you're actually collecting information that is useful across the organization. Maybe it is just something that's focused on the website at the moment, but I can guarantee you that people will talk about the website in another context of how they use it and why they use it and what impact it has on them and their business or their personal lives, etc. And those are insights you can sort of translate into other parts of your organization as well. So there is so much value. It's a sort of a win-win-win all the time, because not only is it a valuable source of information, but it's a place you can go back to sort of, I suppose, just go and double check that you're making the right choices, and because those right choices could have significant impacts on what you're doing moving forward as well.
Yeah, and often, in a way that, if we're talking websites, they're used by staff as well. They're used by leaders as well. So they are tools that are used by employees as well. So there is a other knock-on effect, which actually is the people around me are going to be using it. So getting good feedback, making sure it's easy to use, helps not just the business sell to customers or to serve customers, but to also help their teams do their jobs as well. So I think the other part of this is that helping. It's a very human approach. So when we're talking about user-centered design and we're talking about user research, part of our challenge is to help our client teams kind of connect at a human level with the digital space. So a lot of it, when we're looking at numbers, we're all in our heads, we're having to make decisions. It's all very head-based. And I think what I like to see is when it's that you see it in the body, you see it in the relaxing, because there's a connection. There's a human connection between the qualitative research how we present the users, how we work with the users, and we work with the stakeholders to kind of connect those dots, not just from a head perspective, but from a kind of heart perspective as well. And that's really important, I think, to help make those decisions and to have a genuine proudness of the work that's happening.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. Absolutely. So if I'm a senior leader listening to this and I want to do better, what's the first thing I should do before briefing a digital project? And I'm asking you some really practical advice here. So just so we're getting towards the end here, wrapping up. So let's talk about some practical tips and advice.
So if you were looking to do a new website, for example.
I think that's a great place to start.
Okay. So I think when we're aware there's a new website required, or we think we need a new website or something needs redesigning, the best bet is to do some usability testing. And if that is done well, then you'll not only highlight core usability issues with your current website and maybe your competitor websites, you'll uncover kind of gaps in the market where needs are not being met. You'll capture marketing insights you wouldn't have really thought about. But across all of this, you'll get to see what's the user experience like really. Is it a dog's dinner, like I think it is, and therefore we need a whole new website? Or actually, are there a few practical issues we can fix quite quickly and make that experience so much better and see the results? Or sometimes it might be a bit of both. Actually, we can improve the website as it is to give us a bit of breathing space whilst we think about a new design, or we've got new products that we're bringing in, or new ideas we want to bring into a new website. So my advice would always be a bit of investment in some qualitative research, and that would be usability testing with a few handfuls of your target audience, ideally recruited independently so they don't know who the client is, and it's a nice, fresh, realistic view of them using your website to see how they get on. Are they able to complete their goals? Do they come away with a positive perspective? Are they likely to complete their journey with you? Are they likely to purchase or to order your service or to fulfill their need? Or would they go elsewhere to do that? And that builds up a really good perspective of what is needed right now.
I think what I'll add to that as well is that the value of what you've just described there is that it's also going to reveal if your website is even the problem, because often it's too easy to blame the technology, as it were. But then what you find out through those conversations, and even if they are in the framework of usability tests, you can find out that actually the problem is not necessarily the website. It might be the next stage where they're talking to customer support or whatever. And then you find that actually there are frictions internally within the organization that is impacting the user experience in ways that you had not anticipated. And again, that is the value of talking to customers and listening to them, because they will tell you the things, or they'll give you the answers to the questions you never knew you needed to ask. And that, again, is also really, really important.
Absolutely. I think that is certainly feedback that we receive on doing the research. Is you just don't realize that was a thing that we needed to look at. I think when we're quite creative, and leaders are creative, and they deserve to get to that place where they can make fast decisions and set a vision. I don't want to take that away. I think the vision is really important, to being able to drive that forward. I think the point is that actually we never know fully how to implement that vision. So it's not about the vision is wrong, the idea is wrong. It's about the execution and the translation between an idea, a business goal, a new strategy, and its execution, what it actually looks like, how it ties together, how it connects to the back end, to the front end, to the users, to the business. That's the bit we're working at. It's not about taking away vision and taking away ideas. It's about making them really come to life, making sure they deliver, making sure they work, and making sure fundamentally there's long-term success from any work that's undertaken.
Yeah, I think it's really important to reiterate here that this is not about telling people that they are wrong. It's about supporting their vision, and it just might be that they're not following the right path to achieving that vision, and that this will help them actually go onto the right path. They're not wrong, they're not right. It's just, well, actually, hopefully they are absolutely right. It's just that they're not going in the right direction, and this can help them shift into the right direction, avoid that pain, avoid those delays, avoid the going over budget, etc., and go, wow, yeah, my intuition was absolutely right, because I do know my audiences. It's just I needed to have a bit more of a conversation with them to go and know and find out about the nuance that I wasn't getting naturally just by running a business, basically. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to see their idea come to fruition. And again, I think by doing this upfront work, getting a balanced view, bringing in the user narrative, shaping the interfaces or the product or service around those journeys that users are going to take, whilst it might feel it's upfront heavy, you'll be much more confident. And I guarantee much less sleepless nights in that journey, managing the project, looking at all the different agents that are working in the project, the budgets that are going into it, the timescales, the delivery, and then obviously the launch process. And fingers crossed it works. So across that process, I think a lot of this is about actually it's a much more pleasant project doing it this way than when we haven't got that insight.
I agree. I absolutely agree with that. Okay, so let's go on to final thoughts now. Would you like to share your thoughts on best practice or recommendations you have for senior leaders listening to this?
What I would like to see is more drive from leadership to invest in kind of research, and certainly the qualitative side, to bring the narrative into the story. We've been in business since 2007. UX has exploded, and UX means different things to different people. I get that. Whenever we've talked to people that are out there trying to do UX, one of the challenges they face is a lack of investment. There isn't a necessity often to do that research piece. And I think if you speak to a lot of people that are doing UX and working very hard, certainly on client-side projects, one thing they would like is more access to research, more budget to do research, more ability to bring users in and actually watch them using the website. So I think a lot of the time, whereas to me, the research and usability testing is fundamental to UX, the way the UX role has evolved is that's become less of a piece. So I really would like senior leadership to kind of put their hands in the pockets, invest a bit more. Not necessarily come to agencies like myself, but to their teams, to the people that are running UX, have UX in their job title, encourage them to do research, give them the chance to go out and do it properly. Not relying on AI tools, but actually going out there, eyeball to eyeball, with potential customers, potential service users, potential influencers, even staff who can be users. Really important to do more of that stuff. So I think it doesn't have to have lots of money put at it. There are creative ways to do this. But I think fundamentally, if you're going to do it right, give the time, give the drive, give the push, encourage more qualitative research in your projects up front.
And also, there's no denying that for agencies like you, arriving at a client's office and finding that you have access to all those insights is an absolute godsend. Like, again, you don't have to guess, you don't have to pretend. You just go, I see it, and I know exactly what to implement. That is beautiful. And I've been in your shoes, having managed many digital projects as well in my career, not having had that. And I know how much I wished I had that. And often now I hear more and more agencies like yourself saying, God, I wish I had that. We need to get that research. We need to push the clients to do at least a little bit so that we know why we're building this. And it's not just guesswork, or as I call it always, I don't like the word best practice. So I keep mentioning it as a thing because I believe it's a cop out for doing good research.
Yeah, and best practice for one may not be the right for the other.
100%.
I think that's really important to note. I think you're right. I think for me, looking at our clients, they're working on sites I have so much more confidence in because they've got that input and that insight. And again, we're often brought in when a site has gone through this, launched, and isn't hitting its numbers, and they're not quite sure why. They can see the data, and that's where we come in with a typical usability test to find out what, really uncover what is actually happening from a user perspective. Sometimes it might just be a few minor tweaks, a bit of name changing, a bit of button switching and things like that, and can make a big difference. But again, sometimes you're coming in and realizing that, the whole site structure is wrong, or, there's some quite big fundamental issues with the website that actually would have been uncovered much earlier if we'd been brought in earlier in that process. So I think it's just taking the time to involve users, not just when you're redesigning a site, but on a regular basis to give you that right perspective.
Okay, so for me, my final thoughts are, or at least bits of advice are: firstly, don't treat research as a cost. Treat it as a decision insurance. So, doing that research prevents those bad ideas from taking hold and makes the good ones even stronger. I think that's really the key for me. I would advocate for, at the very least, talking to 5 users before you write your brief. And you've been talking about that, Ali, throughout the whole conversation about, before you get that brief out there, talk to your users. It helps you catch the blind spots. It helps you clarify the goals. And it gives your own team a head start, not to mention the people who receive that brief as well. And also, as a senior leader, you're not the one who has to do the research. You just need to sponsor it, really. And you need to give your team the space and the support to do it right. And I can guarantee that you will see some pretty amazing things happening if you give them that support.
Yeah, I think so. One thing is worth noting as well. I saw one of these AI tools, and their pitch was no more having to have awkward conversations with customers. And I was like, that's the whole point. If you're not willing to sit down and have a conversation with a customer, then you're in the wrong job. And quite frankly, if you're needing to use these tools to test your website with AI because you're not wanting to sit with customers is quite frankly wrong. So I think just encouraging more people, leaders, juniors, people in between, just spending more time with customers will pay dividends big time.
Absolutely. But I will also say that AI does have its role. And you're
Absolutely.
absolutely right. It's not about replacing the humans. It's about, in my world, it's an incredible help to actually sift through a hell of a lot of unstructured data, which includes conversations, and to find the patterns and the themes that maybe you might not always see. And a healthy mix between the human doing the research and the analysis and having AI as a supportive tool is actually incredibly powerful.
Yeah, of course, with the observation piece, which is what we do, a lot of it doesn't come out in a transcript. So you can't rely on a transcript to give you that information. So I think for us, I always say with my team, look, we've got to feel connected. So fundamentally, you've got to design your own scripts, you've got to do your own research. And because a lot of it's observational, we've got to come out of it with our own findings first and foremost. But you're right, AI is really important at that point, because once we've got all that down, we can use it to just check anything we've missed.
That's it.
Anything that's interesting there. Is there anything deeper we can look at here? So it really does play a role as an assistant, but it doesn't replace the research itself. So again, I think what you've got is a lot of these tools are being released and launched
So many.
to replace. And to me, that's fundamentally wrong. UX is a human-based approach and pursuit, and should remain that way, because that's where the best work will come.
And most users are human, so we probably want to keep that.
Whatever, yeah. Even when our AI tools are being utilized, running our production, most of the time, most of us are working on something that at some point a human is going to have to interact with.
That's right.
So that's the importance of doing this.
Well, Ali, thank you so much for that. That was really, really, really interesting conversation, and I really hope that anyone listening has some really good takeouts, because I'm really glad that we focused on those practical aspects. And obviously, if anyone has any questions, reach out either to Ali or myself, and we'll be absolutely happy to continue that with you as well.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable talking about this. It's always a good experience having a chat and talking to other people about this stuff, and really good to hear your views as well, Alex. Thank you.
Thanks. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.